Yo, Rabbi Sai, so tonight's shir is being sponsored by Rabbi Binyamin Baum and dedicated l'schus the Bogopolsky family for bracha and atzlocha in the next chapter of their lives as they move into a position of Harbosas HaTorah in the state of Florida. Yeah, in case you notice that my voice is different, it really is because I have a cold. So this week in Chutz La'aretz it's Parshas Shelach and it's Parshas Korach, and I want to say something that connects both of these parshas. So the Maises Azoy, the parsha begins Parshas Shelach, Vayedaber Hashem al Moshe Leimer, Shlach lecha anoshim v'yosuru es eretz Canaan. Rashi says, Shlach lecha anoshim, Lomo nismecha parshas meraglim leparshas Miriam. Lefi sheloksal iskei dibo shedibra ba'achel urishoim alolu ro v'loy lokchu musa. In other words, so the reason that the Torah puts the parsha of the meraglim next to the parshas Miriam is because they should have learned from the parshas Miriam not to speak diba, because Miriam was punished for speaking diba about Moshe Rabbeinu, and they didn't learn a lesson. Now, in the end of Parshas Baloischa, it says, "Mikivrois hatava nosu chatzeirois vayiu b'chatzeirois v'tedaber Miriam v'harim b'Moshe loydis ha'isha kushis ha'shelokach." And then the Torah concludes, "V'tisoger Miriam michutz lamachane shivas yomim v'ha'om loy nosa ad hei osef Miriam v'achar nosu ha'om mei chatzeirois v'yachanu b'midbar poron." So we know that the mice of Miriam was in Chatzeros, and immediately after the mice of Miriam, they moved from Chatzeros to Poron. And at the beginning of this week's parsha, it says, "Vayishlach oisam Moshe mi midbar Poron." The meraglim were sent from midbar Poron. So l'chora, the mice of the meraglim actually happened immediately after the mice of Miriam. So that was the gufa de uvda. So what's the question? Lama nismacha Parshas Meraglim leParshas Miriam. It's because that was the chronological order of events. It would seem that that's why the Klei Yakar over here writes, Rabbi Seinu Zichroinam Levrocha Omru, Shesmichus HaMeraglim leMiriam, Lefisha Miriam Loksa al Iskei Diba, Urishoim Alolu Ro V'Loi Lokchu Muser, V'Rotzu Loimar. What Chazal are trying to say, Shemiyad Achrei Maise Miriam Nishtalchu HaMeraglim. Ki Omar Hashem, Pen Yinochem Kol Echad Mehem, V'yikach Musar B'Ra'oisoi Ma Shekora LeMiriam. So the Kli Yakar is learning that the Lama Nismecha over here is not like Lama Nismecha everywhere else. Over here, the Lama Nismecha is not about why it appears in this order in the Torah, because that we know. It appears in this order because that's how it happened. The question is, why did it happen in this order? In other words, why did Hashem arrange it so that the Shiluach HaMeraglim should be immediately after the Ma'aseh Miriam? Because that would give them a chance to learn Musar from the Ma'aseh Miriam and do it right. But besides for the fact that Lafizeh, this Lama Nismecha is different than all other Lama Nismechos. According to him, it should say Lama Nismecha, Lama Nismach Maise Meraglim, La Maise Miriam. It's not a question about the Parsha, it's a question about the Maise. But Chazal say Lama Nismecha Parshas. And also, I mean to say, the Meraglim were sent. They weren't sent. They were only sent because they requested. Klal Yisrael asked to send the meraglim, and Hakadosh Baruch Hu Kaviyachol said that Shlach lecha ledatcha. So, is it right to ask why it happened now? It happened now because that's when Klal Yisrael asked for it. So, it's hard to understand that the question of Lama Nismecha is why it happened now. It wasn't initiated by the Rebbeinu Shalom. It was initiated by Klal Yisrael. Now, the Rav, Rabbi Avadia Miber Tenoro, in his Sefer Amar Noke al HaTorah, says, Kosher, Mazel Shoal Lama Nismecha. What's the question of Lama Nismecha? Otu b'chol HaTorah kula yesh lidrei smuchim. Do we need to dash in smuchim b'chol HaTorah kula? So l'chara, what he's really asking is that mela in a place where it's not the right order, we ask the question, Lama Nismacha, but over here, where it is the right order. So we need to say Pshat why it's written in order. So he says, he answers, V'yashloima mishum shepireish le'il, because we said previously, Gabi b'nesoya ha'oroin, shekosvo yishom kedei lahafsig ben puronus lepuronus. Rashi said that Vehi b'nesoya ha'oroin is ein kamekoimoi. And why is it written where it's written? In order to be mafsig bein puronus lepuronus. V'lachein kosheloi bekan lama nismachu shtei puroni yoizel hazeh v'loi chosh lahafsig beinehem. The question of lama nismach is true. It happened in this order, but the Torah should have put something in between, just like it did, just like in Parshas Baloischo, it put the Vayi ben Soya in between lahafsig bein puronus lepuronus. But the Re'im asks on this. He says, so if so, why did Chazal not ask Lama Nismacha, the Parsha of Miriam, to the Parsha of Kivrei Satava? That's also a smichus of Puronus l'Puronus. And if it's true that whenever we find two Puronus next to each other, we should ask the question of Lama Nismacha, because we see that Vehi ben Soya Oren was written, L'hafsik ben Puronus l'Puronus, then we should ask also how the Maisa Miriam is written immediately after the Maisa of Kivrei Satava, and not only why the Parsha of Miriam is written immediately before the Parsha of the Meraglim. So he says, Imtim Tzaloimar, says the Re'im, Mipneisha Parshas Miriam hi Puronus shel Yochid, Ve'ein HaKosuv Makpid al Smichuso in Puronus Kivrei Satava. If you want to tell me that over there we don't ask this question because over there it's a Puronus Shel Yochid, and we're only makpid lahafsig bein Puronus lepuronus when it's a Puronus Shel Tzibur, he says, Hine mizeh hatam atzmoi ein lahakpid al smichus Puronus Miriam lepuronus hameraglim. By the same token, we shouldn't be bothered by the smichus of the Parshas Hameraglim to the Parshas Miriam, because Miriam is a Puronus Shel Yochid. L'chara, I mean, the pshat in the Rav is Pashit that when we're masmich two Puronus, it emphasizes the goydel hachet of the second Puronus, because they didn't learn from what happened just before. So we're taka only makbid on a Puronus shel tzibur, but not the first Puronus. When the second Puronus is a Puronus shel tzibur, the Torah is mafsik. Therefore, the Rav is saying that we're asking the question, how come the Torah was masmich the parsha of the Meraglim to the Parshas Miriam? Because true, the parsha of Miriam is a Puronus Shel Yochid, but the parsha of the Meraglim is a Puronus Shel Tzibur, and therefore the Torah should have covered it up by being mafsik between Miriam and the Meraglim. Whereas we don't ask the question that the Torah should have been mafsik between Miriam and the Kivrei Satava that's before, because since the Puronus Shel Miriam, the second Puronus in that context, is a Puronus Shel Yochid, we don't ask that question. In any case, that's l'chorah what the Rav meant. Now the Re'im says a different teretz. He says that in the beginning of Parshas Dvarim, beginning of Chumash Dvarim, it says, Eila hadvarim asher diber Moshe, v'goymer, v'lovan v'chatzerois v'di zohov. Rashi says, v'chatzerois b'machlokosoi shel Korach. That what happened to Chatzerois, the machlokes of Korach, that's what the word Chatzerois is a reference to. As we know, Rashi says over there that all the places that are being mentioned represent a certain chait, and Rashi says Chatzerois represents the chait of Korach. So Lefizeh, the machlokes of Korach was before the Shiluach HaMeraglim, because the Shiluach HaMeraglim was from Midbar Paran. So they left Paran, and they went to, they left Chatzerois and went to Paran. If the Maisa of Korach was back in Chatzerois, it has to be that the Maisa of Korach was between Miriam and the Meraglim. And therefore we're asking Lama Nismacha, Parshas Meraglim Parshas Miriam, and we skipped over Korach. That's how the Re'im learns. Now, truth be told, that Rashi in Parshas Korach says on the pasuk Vayishma Moshe Vayipol al Ponov Mipnei HaMachloikis Shezeh Kvar B'Yodom Sirchoin Revi'i. This was their fourth sin. Chatu be'egel by Chal Moshe, b'misayninim by Yispal Moshe, b'meraglim by Yom Moshe El Hashem v'shomu Mitzrayim, b'machlokosei shel Korach nisrashlu yodav. So in Rashi it's mafurish that Korach was after the meraglim, not before the meraglim. So the Re'im acknowledges this, but he says it must be midrashis chalukos. And Rashi has another pshat in Dvorim on the word b'chatzeiros, and the Rashi in Parshas Korach that says that it's the Sircha Revi is going according to the other pshat, but the Lama Nismacha that Rashi asks in the beginning of the Parsha is going according to the pshat that the Maisa of Korach was in Chatzeiros, and then it was before the Meraglim, and therefore we're asking why did the Torah put the Parsha of the Meraglim immediately after the Parsha of Miriam, in spite of the fact that Korach was in between. Anyway, according to the Mahalach of the Re'im, it comes out that the chronological order of events was Miriam, Korach, Meraglim. And our question is, Lama Nismacha, why did we skip Korach? And the answer is that we want to bring out that the Miriam was like al iskei diba, and the Rishonim alalu ro v'loy lakhu musar, that they should have learned a lesson from the Maisa of Miriam. Now I ask you, the Maisa of Korach is not Iskei Diba. The Maisa of Korach is Iskei Diba. They spoke against Moshe Rabbeinu that he was Perish Me'ishtay on his own. I mean, that's real Lashon Hara. So why did we move Korach out and put the Meraglim next to Miriam in order to connect the Maisa of the Meraglim with Iskei Diba? I mean, the Maisa of Korach is also Iskei Diba, and even more so, because behemshich to the Diba of Miriam, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Lo yichein avdi Moshe b'chol beisi ne'emanhu, peh el peh, adaber boy. So here, the Rebbeinu Shalom clearly addressed the Madregas HaNavuah of Moshe Rabbeinu that's above and beyond the Madrega of the other Nevi'im. No. It's Avada Taina on Korach that immediately afterwards rebelled against Moshe Rabbeinu and didn't accept his leadership. It's a much more direct Avera against what happened in the Maisa of Korach than it is. So this is Avada in the Maisa Miriam. We should put the Maisa of Korach immediately after the Maisa Miriam because Korach should have learned from the Maisa Miriam not to speak. He should have learned about the Madrega of Moshe Rabbeinu and not to speak against Moshe Rabbeinu. So the Torah changed the order. The right order would have been much better, because then we would have Korach immediately after the Maisa Miriam, which would really flow in terms of the content, because Korach is rebelling against Moshe Rabbeinu. Behemshich to the fact that Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moshe Rabbeinu, and the Rebbeinu Shalom said, Lo yichein avdi Moshe. And he continued with Iskei Diba, and then come the Meraglim, who are nichshal in Iskei Diba. So Mistama the Pshat needs to be that since Ein Muktim and Mu'ucher b'Torah, we say that the Seder in Torah is really is Torah, meaning it's not a chronological order, but it's a logical order. And it's coming to teach, like the Radak says in Parshas Bereshis, and it's a Mefurish Zohar, that Torah is Miloshen Hoirah. Torah is Miloshen lesson. It's teaching us something. It's teaching us a lesson. So Chazal are telling us that the smichus of Parshas HaMeraglim to the Parshas Miriam is coming to teach us a lesson that when we experience something, when we see something, we should learn from it. And Memela, in spite of the fact that the Torah is ma'akim shmoina oisius, not to be moitzi adova megunim mipiv, and sometimes the Torah is mafsik between one puronis and another in order to cover it up, But here the Torah put these two things together in order that we should learn that one should be learning Musar from what he sees. Now, if Korach would be in the right place, if Korach would be where he was in the chronological order, we wouldn't learn any lesson because we would assume that he's there because that's where it happened. It's only by taking Korach out and putting the Meraglim next to the Maisa Miriam that we can learn that the Torah has an expectation of us that we should learn Musar from what we see. Also, it's a much greater chiddush to say that the Meraglim should have learned from the Maisa Miriam than to say that Korach should have learned from the Maisa Miriam. Because Korach Avada needed to learn from the Maisa Miriam. I mean, the Rebbeinu Shalom just said, Loi Chein Avdi Moshe. The Rebbeinu Shalom just spoke about the greatness of Moshe Rabbeinu, and Korach went against Moshe Rabbeinu. So that's not a chiddush that this is a terribly wrong thing that he didn't learn a lesson. What the Torah is trying to tell us is that you have to learn lessons even in a roundabout way. I mean, the Meraglim who were just talking about the land, they should have learned from Miriam, who spoke about the Adon Nevi'im, who spoke about a human being, who spoke about Adon Nevi'im, and she was punished. Even from something that's so far removed from what they're doing, they should have learned Musar. So the Torah Dafka puts the Parsha of the Meraglim next to the Parsha of Miriam in order that we should know Ad Heichon Advar Magiyim, that we need to learn Musar from what we hear and see. Now, it's pashut that this chiyuv of learning Musar from what we see is true about enhancing our kiyum of all Reish Mem Ches mitzvahs asay, and it's true about encouraging us to stay away from all Shin Samachei mitzvahs lois asay. So there must be a reason why this particular lesson of learning Musar from what we see appears dafke in the context of Lashon Hara. In this context, the Torah teaches us this important lesson that one needs to learn from what he hears and sees. I want to explain that. Now, the chiyuv of learning Musar from the Maisa Miriam is not just learned from the Smichas HaParshias of the Maisa Hameraglim to the Maisa Miriam, but it's a mafurish pasuk in Parshas Kiseitze. Hishomer benega hatzoras lishmor moed v'la'asois kechol asher yoru eschem hakoyanim alavim kasher tzivisim tishmeru la'asois zochar es asher osa Hashem Elokecha leMiriam baderech b'tzeischem miMitzrayim. Rashi says, im bosa lizoher sheloi tilke b'tzoras al tesapel lashon hara. If you want to make sure that you won't get tzoras, hishomer benega hatzoras. In other words, pashut, it means that you should be careful to keep all the laws of tzaras. But Rashi is saying, Hishameh b'nei tzaras, in the sense, if you want to make sure that you don't get tzaras, so al tesapel lashon hara, don't talk lashon hara. And how are you going to prevent yourself from talking lashon hara? Zachar ha'asui leMiriam shedibra ba'achiyov v'lachsa b'negoy. The Mekar Advarim is in the Sifri, and the Ramban counts it as a mitzvahs asay in the Tov Reish Yud Gimel mitzvahs. Zochar es asher osa Hashem Elokecha leMiriam, and this will serve as a reminder to stay away from talking lashon hara. We'll remember that Miriam was laksa b'tzaras on iskei diba. So the story of learning from the Maisa Miriam is not just from the Smichas HaParshas. According to the Ramban, it's a mitzvah same in our Torah, and according to other Rishonim, it's a pasuk in the Torah. So it's not just that there's an expectation that the Nesiei Yisrael of the Dor Deya, who personally saw what happened to Miriam, should have learned a lesson. But L'Dor Zolam, even Pashut Yidden, who never saw the Maisa happen, but heard about it, are also expected to learn a lesson. Zachar es asher osa Hashem Elokecha leMiriam, and you should be Lokeach Musar, not to talk lashon hara. But this whole thing is tzarech and gadol, because the diba of Aaron and Miriam against Moshe Rabbeinu turns out to have been a mistake, because They said, Ha'ach rak b'Moshe diber Hashem, aloi gam bonu diber. And as Rashi says, we're also prophets, and the Rebbeinu Shalom didn't tell us to separate from our spouses. It must be that he didn't tell them either. And he did this on his own. And therefore, they were complaining about Moshe Rabbeinu's behavior. But the truth is, Loichein avdi Moshe b'chol beisin emonu pel pe'adabe b'y b'marav loy b'chidos. As Rashi explains, I told him to be perish miyishtoi because his madregas hanevua requires precious min ha'isha, even though your madregas hanevua doesn't require. So it turns out that they made a mistake. We know that the Isser of Lashon Hara is even when it's not a mistake at all, even when it's perfectly true, you're not allowed to talk Lashon Hara. So how do we say that Hishomer b'nega tzaras? If you want to make sure that you won't get a tzaras, and don't talk Lashon Hara, and what's going to keep you from talking Lashon Hara? Remembering the Ma'aseh Miriam, how is that going to keep me from talking Lashon Hara? It's only going to keep me from talking Lashon Hara when it's a mistake. But how is it going to keep me from talking Lashon Hara when it's actually true? Yeah. Now, you know, the Mogen Avram in Orach Chaim Siman Samach, he says, Issa bekavonos ubeksavim. V'hazchiris halolu mitzvahs say that there are schiris that were mechuyev min HaTorah to remember. The kavonos and the ksavim, you know, is from the Reb Chaim Vital and the name of the Arizal. V'chulon nirmazos bebirchas Avarabba, that all the schiros are mentioned, are alluded to in the bracha of Avarabba. L'chein, kishayoyma uvanu v'acharta yizkar matan Torah. That's when we were chosen. When we say l'shimcha hagodol, we should remember the Maisa Amalek, she'ein Hashem sholem, until Amalek is eradicated. So l'shimcha hagodol reminds us of the Maisa Amalek. L'hoidos l'cha, hapeh nivra l'hoidos, v'loi l'daber lashon hara. V'zeu schiras Maisa Miriam. Yeah, so l'chara, when we say l'hoidos l'cha, we remember that our mouth was created for praising the Lord, yeah, for thanking the Rebbeinu Shalom, and not for talking Lashon Hara. For the same by the same token, we could say it was created not to talk Nivul Peh, not to talk Dvarim B'Telem. I mean, how does Lashon Hara come into this? It must be that in some way Lashon Hara and L'hoidos L'cha are a Tarti de Sasri, and therefore, when we say L'hoidos L'cha, it reminds us Sha'apeh Niv L'hoidos, and not the opposite of L'hoidos, which is L'davar Lashon Hara. So what does that mean? You know, the pasuk says, "Mi ha'yish shechofetz chaim oyev yomim lirois toiv nitzaylo shein chomeira." You know, if chaim would mean life as opposed to death, so it would mean that somebody that's not noitzeh l'shoynai meira will drop dead, and then we wouldn't have to continue and say that he's oyev yomim lirois toiv. I mean, if he's not alive, it's not relevant. So it must be that when we mean chafetz chaim, we mean somebody who wants to live a life that's worth living, a life that's worth being called life. Yeah, so we're saying mi oisha chafetz chaim, and also he's oyev yomim lirois toiv. Not so clear. What in the world does that mean? He's oyev yomim lirois toiv, and through nitzor l'shon chomeiro, he will be zoichet to that. Parshas lirois toiv means he wants to see good, and he sees no good. Some people, you know, wherever they turn, they only see negativity. They see no positive. Everything looks down. Everything looks wrong. So, and sometimes a person has an awakening, and he wants to be a oyev yomim, and he wants to be roya toiv. So David HaMelech says, you know, nitzor l'shoin chameira. What does that mean? Because, you know, the Chinuch says in Mitzvah Tezayin and in many places that ha'adam nifal lefi pu'uloisav and achrei ha'pu'ulois nimshachim alavavos. A person is impacted by what he does. His expressions make an impression on him. So, by talking Lashon Hara, if you talk negative, you actually start to think negative. If you stop talking negative, you'll free yourself of that negativity and you'll stop seeing negative. He says, you want to be a roya toiv. The way to do that is to stop talking ra. Then you'll become a roya toiv. you know, the chinuch, the Rabbeinu Yonis says in the Shai Tshuva, Shai Gimel, Ois Reish Yud Zayin, that the Baal Lashon Hara is like a fly, like a zvuv, hameiniach mokoim bori, v'oimed b'mokoim hapogum. So, in other words, that fly is gravitated to the mokom hapogum. He gravitates to the mokom hapogum. So also the Baal Lashon Hara is like a zvuv, hameiniach mokoim bori. He doesn't even have an interest in the mokom bori. He's always looking for the mokom hapogum. That's a consequence of talking Lashon Hara, because adam nifal fi pu'loisav. The less a person talks negative, the less he'll gravitate to negative, the less he'll see negative, and the more of a positive person he'll become. He'll become a oyev yomim liris toiv. And this means that bechlal the issa of Lashon Hara is not just verbalizing the Lashon Hara, but it's bemis the thinking of Lashon Hara. And so it says in Zechariah, Kapitel Zayin, V'roas ish ochiv al tachshavu b'lvavchem, that we're forbidden from thinking negative about each other. In the Igeres HaKodesh of the Baal HaTanya, in the back of the Sefer HaTanya, Simach of Beis, he writes, V'zeh Loshen Val Kain, Ahuvai, Yedidai. Yeah, my dear friends, no v'no litroyach b'cholei v'nefesh, litkoya avas re'ehu b'liboy. V'ish ro'as re'ehu al tachshavu b'lvavchem ksiv. V'al tale alev la'olam. Never think negative about your friend. V'im tale yehedfena miliboy kehindoif oshon. Push it away immediately. U'kemoi machshavas avodah zara mamash. Thinking negative about another yid is like a machshavas avodah zara. And why he says, Ki gedoylo lashon hara, keneged avodah zara v'gilei reis v'shvichas damim. It's a mefurish gemara in Erech. V'im bedibur kach v'chulei. If it's a bad thing to talk lashon hara, it's even worse to think it. Ukvar noida l'chol chacham leiv. All intelligent people know Yisrain hechsher hamachshava al hadibur. Hein letoiv, hein lemutav. That machshava is a more powerful thing than dibur, both for good and for bad. Based on the Gemara Mistam of Hurei Avera, Kashim Avera, the Rambam explains that so beautifully in the Moreh Nevuchim, that when a person uses the faculty of thinking, Lara, he's using. I'll read you the Lashon Rambam. He says, "V'husha adam k'sheyamre, omnam yamre mitzat hamikrim anim shochem achar achayim sheloi." He's using the lowly parts of himself. K'moshe b'yarti, she'adam lo yasem meri rak bebehamiyusoi. Only the behemoth within me is doing what it's doing. Aval hamachshava, he mizgulei sa'adam hanim shochem achar tzirosoi. Thinking is the higher end of who we are. And in any case, the Baal Tanya is saying that thinking Lashon Hara is even worse than talking it. Yeah, and Mamela, it's included in the union of Al Tadin as Chaver Chashuv Gelam Koimai and having done its Kol Adam L'Kav Schus. It's all part of the Lirois Toif. This also connects with the fact that in Parshas Baloischa it says by the Messiah in Va'ato Nafshenu Yevesha Ein Koil Bilti El Hamon Einenu. Now we know that everybody tasted what he wanted to taste. So obviously the complaint is they wanted to taste negative. If you're looking for it, Itaka is negative to you. But if you make that switch, then it won't be negative. And that's the union of being either a roya toiv or a kol ha-paisel b'mumay paisel. Yeah, and that's also what the Gemara says. V'chima hano yesh l'bal haloshen. In other words, the Baal haloshen has no hano b'chlal in life because he becomes a roya ra. Everything is negative, and Mamela he appreciates nothing. He enjoys nothing. Now, Mamela kumtois, that this midah of roya ra is not limited to how I view people, but it's how I view everything. As the Rambam says mefurish in the end of Hilchis Tumis Tzoras, the Rambam says at Tzoras einam min hagei shel olam ela oisu pela hoya b'Yisrael kedei lazira miloshen hara Shamasaper Lashon Hara, Mishtano is Kirois Beisoy, Im Chazaboy, etc. Vim Omad Berishoy, etc. Vim Muvdul Mefrosim Levadoy. Ad Shelo Yisasek B'Sichas HaRishoyim, Shehi Alitzonis V'Lashon Hara. Val Inyan Zeh Mazhir B'Torah, Zocher Es Asher Osa Hashem Elokecha LeMiriam Hanaviyah LeMiriam Harei Oim Hisboinenu Ma'ir LeMiriam Hanaviyah Shedibra Ba'Achel Shedibra Ba'Achio Shehigdoila Mimenu B'Shonim Begidlo Yisrael B'Kel V'Sikna Atzmei Latzila Min Hayam V'Hiloi Dibra B'Gnuso Yela Toaso Shehishvis Oisei L'Shar Navim V'Huloi Hoya Makbid Al Kolei L'Advarim Shenem V'Ishmoi She'onav Admoi V'Av B'Kenensho Miyad B'Tzeras Kal V'Choyim L'Vnei Odom Atipshim Shemarbim L'Dabek Dolos in the Flois L'Fichach Roi L'Misha Rotzel L'Chavein Or Choisov L'Yisrachek Mishivasam V'L'Daber Imoim Kedei Shelo Yitofes Adam B'Reshes Yishon V'Sichlusam. Anyway, the Ram goes on, and then he says that what happens is that if somebody hangs out with a Leitzim or a Shoim, yeah, so B'Tchilo Marbim B'Divrei Havoy. First they talk Stam Narishkeit. You should have a Koil Ksil B'Roiv Dvar. Mitoich Kach Boyin L'Sape B'Gnus HaTzadik. Kein Yeshenema Teolam No Sifsei Sheker Adoivrois Al Tzadik Osak. Umitoich Kach Yelam Hergel Adabe B'Neviim. Not only Tzadikim, he starts talking about Neviim. B'Litin Doifi B'Divrei. Kein Yeshenema Vayiu Mal'ivim B'Malachei Ho'eloikim U'Boizim Dvoroi U'Misa'atim B'Neviov. Umitoich Kach Boyin Le Daber B'Eloikim V'Koifrim B'Eker. Shenemar vayechbu b'nei Yisrael dvarim asher lo yichein al Hashem Elokeim v'chein hu meshatu b'shamayim piyem u'l'shoinam tahalech ba'oretz. Mi goram lahem loshis b'shamayim piyem. What brought them to talk against the Rebbeinu Shalom Kaviyach? L'shoinam sheholcha tchila ba'oretz. So you see that. That's where the Rama puts Litzonis and Lashon Hara into one package, because I guess Litzonis is also about not giving things their proper value, taking everything lightly, and then it becomes taking everything negatively. But taking, viewing people in a negative way is it brings a person to view everything in a negative way, because listen, people were created in Hashem's image. Who created people? The Rebbeinu Shalom. I mean, yeah, some people feel that, if the world would only not have people, it would be such a wonderful place. But I mean to say, people, that's God's creation. And if you're negative about all people, if you're negative about people, so you become negative about the Rebbeinu Shalom. Yeah. So Mamela, the pshat is that Lahoidois Lecha is really the opposite of Lashon Hara, as the Magen Avraham says in the name of the Arizal. Because somebody that's a Mesaper Lashon Hara loses the capacity for Lahoidois Lecha. He's not thankful for anything. I mean, he feels that this world is a horrible place to be. But if you on a Tzoylo Shon Chomera, you become a Oyev Yomim Liris Taiv, and then you have the capacity to be Lahoidois Lecha. You see, the Mitzvah is Moitzera, the Gemara says in Arochin. The pshat is that he finds Ra. He says, and truth be told, that Lefize, you understand that always Lashon Hara is false. What do I mean to say? Because it's really you can't know what any particular act, the full meaning of any particular act, if you don't understand the context of his psychological makeup, of his upbringing, of his environment. I mean, there's so much that you need to know. And you can't figure out anyone, and you'll never be Magilim Koimai, right? You'll never be in his shoes. And Memela, the pshat is that, yes, what the Rebbeinu Shalom said to Aaron and Miriam, Loi Chein Avdi Moshe, is in a sense true, is a true statement to every Baal Lashon Hara. That what was the chet of Miriam? That she compared Moshe Rabbeinu's nevuah to her nevuah, and her nevuah to his nevuah, and felt that if she wasn't told to be Parish, he wasn't told to be Parish. But the truth was that Loi Chein Avdi Moshe. There's always a Loi Chein, because you and him and you are two different people, and you can't fully understand where he's at and what it means. You see, the Meraglim, they were punished Yom Lashana, 40 years, based on the 40 days. L'maisa, they only said the Lashon Hara in the end. During the 40 days, they were just scouting Eretz Yisrael. So why were they punished for all the 40 days? But Teretz is because what they said was based on what they saw. I mean, they saw Koivrei Mesim. They thought that it must be a Eretz Echelos Yeshvel, in spite of the fact that really the Rebbeinu Shalom did it l'tevasam, that they shouldn't notice them. So you see, the Baal Lashon Hara, he reads reality in a negative way, and that's what brings him to say it. And Memela, all the 40 days were really part of the Lashon Hara project because they saw it wrong. So the Rebbeinu Shalom Zahalfen, we should be zeicher to be Oyev Yomim Lirois Toiv. Rabbi say, I wish you all the best.